Hello everyone, it is time for this week's live stream. Sorry I'm a few minutes late, I couldn't get here quicker. I'd like to thank Rogers Reef Food for supporting this channel and allowing me to continue to do my show week after week. Also, I would like to show you the current issue of Coral Magazine that has arrived in people's mailboxes and should be showing up at your local fish store soon. If you aren't a subscriber, you can buy it at a store. If it's not at your store, you can ask your store to carry it. And of course, you can subscribe and get it delivered to your mailbox. It is a wonderful publication, been in print for 22 years. This is volume 22, issue number 4. There are 6 issues every year. I highly recommend everyone get this magazine because it will give you more knowledge than what's in your head right now. I offer consultation services one-on-one. If you need some help, let me know. You can just email me at sales@melesreef.com and we can schedule a video chat where I can assist you and help make your tank a little bit better, hopefully. And here I am. Sorry I couldn't make it last week. I wasn't feeling well. And so I had a plan all week what this topic would be about. But the best way to do this topic would have been sort of like my tank tour, where I do the tour of the tank on the anniversary and I walk through and show you everything. But instead we're just going to discuss it and why I use the equipment I use. And of course, we'll have the chat here live to where you can ask questions and I'll do my best to answer them as well. But so to start off, look, I do have some video for you because I'm not a monster. I do want to point out that here we are. This is the 400-gallon reef as of today. Yes, I'm kind of covering it up a little bit. Let's see if I can shrink myself just a little bit because you don't have to see me all the time. Let me squish that down. Okay, there I am. So the water's a little bit murky this morning. I don't know. I did clean the front and side glass. The back glass I didn't clean. But there was this weird kind of little bit of haze to it. Maybe it was the lens of my camera. I don't know. But that's the tank right now. Next weekend, it won't look like that. This tank has been running now for 11 and a half years. The reef has been reset twice during that time. It is desperately overdue for another reset. I should have done this one 6 months ago. But as you can see, the coral mass in the center is completely at the surface. And for a while there, it was pretty, and now it's not. Now there's other stuff trying to grow in there, like bubble algae, and some anemones have snuck their way to the peak, right through the center of the bird's nest. So all that has to come out. And next Saturday, I'm going to open up my house to DFW Mass members to come over and to collect some corals from me so I can declutter my reef. So I don't plan to live stream that process because to be honest, I think it's just going to be boring as can be as a viewer. I will not be able to interact with you or see what the chat says or anything like that because I will be busy climbing up and down, reaching into the tank, putting things in the frag tank, taking things out of the frag tank, bagging things up, answering people's questions in person. And just to have a camera pointed at the general room seems like that would be crazy boring. But who knows? People watch the most random things. Sometimes just being in the same room makes you happy. I don't know. I just don't really see a point of doing that. But so let's talk about the equipment because everything on your system is what makes it tick. And if you have good equipment, if you have quality equipment, hopefully it will last you a long, long time and you won't have to replace it. So I'm just going to start. I made a list, and I also stuck pretty much this list in this the video description, so you can actually see the whole list right now if you want to jump ahead. But bottom line is, I feel the core of a reef tank that has a sump, of course, is going to have a return pump, and the return pump in my tank is the Abyzz A200. I've been running it for probably about 6 years. I turn it off every single night when I feed my tank. It's off for 10 minutes, and it comes back to life automatically because it's plugged into my controller. The return pump is set to 80% as my flow rate. If there's a need, if there's some strange urge, or there's some kind of a crisis going on, I can slow down the return pump to a slower rate. For example, and I'm going to reference a lot of things that have been on this channel over the last few years to kind of give you reference in case you want to jump and go find these videos later on your own. But for example, I had a huge acropora in the center of my reef, beautiful. It had grown into 3 tiers, and one tier completely RTN'd. It turned to like this brown jelly smoke thing that was spreading like a wildfire. And I turned my return pump way down to maybe, I don't know, 55%, 60%, which you would think would be quite a bit, but actually it was just kind of getting water back up into the tank and letting water drain down, but it wasn't blowing the RTN onto more corals. I didn't want to spread and jump. It already had, and I didn't want it to spread further. I didn't want to reach in and distribute that, let's just call it poisonous toxin, and land on other corals and burn them up. And so what I did by slowing the flow and stopping the Vortech pumps from running, I was able to isolate that area, reach in, and basically lift out this lava and get it out of my tank. And then, of course, there was a few other corals that had got stung, and they lost some life because of it. But at least it didn't just like go everywhere. If you were to reach into your tank when everything's just running at high speed and you aren't preparing for this mentally, you could just watch everything blow everywhere and they're like, oh my god, it's on everything, and then you may end up losing a lot of your livestock. So having a DC powered pump is actually really ideal, giving you the flexibility to make an adjustment in a pinch. Another nice thing about the DC pump, and I've used it on occasion, sometimes I forget, but for example, I did a big water change, I think it was November of last year. Man, time has really gotten confusing over the last couple of years, but maybe it was November last year, maybe it was November the year before. But I remember, I think it was the year before, I think it was 2024. I didn't adjust the return pump, and I had done this big water change. My tank was half empty. I mean, literally, the water was halfway down, all the way down to the Vortech pump on the far left side of this video. And when I turned the water back on, the return pump on, it shot the water into the reef. I mean, it created, all this water went everywhere because it not only shot out, but it kind of like ricocheted off the rockwork or the corals and spattered everywhere. It was up on the ceiling. It went everywhere because the random flow generator nozzles, those two things right in front of Spock's head there, they shot water every different direction into the air because there was no water in the tank yet. The tank was half empty. And in that situation, it was this big surge excitement. Jack started barking. I was, caught completely I was shocked. I was not prepared. And it didn't occur to me, while the tank is on a lower water level, I could just adjust the return pump to pour in the water quietly, like water going into a fountain, versus blasting it like I'm going through the car wash. So I quickly did adjust it down, but I believe that's why I lost my purple tang, because that jet of water just freaked everyone out. I think the purple tang basically had a heart attack and died on the spot because it died during the water change, and I've never had a fish ever die in a water change, and I'd had that fish for nearly 20 years. So again, being able to bring your pump down or to raise it up is great. The one thing you should do with your return pump, and I did with my own, my tank has 4.5-inch drains. And 3 are in use, and 1 is completely bone dry. It's there as an emergency if one of the drains were to be fully obstructed, to, in theory, keep up with the drains and not let the tank overflow. And I took my pump and I took it all the way to 100% because I wanted to see if the drains could keep up no matter what. Like if the pump just suddenly went crazy and wanted to go full speed. And I ran it like that for many minutes, and the tank was louder, but it definitely kept up drain-wise, which was fantastic. So if you haven't tested your return pump yet to make sure it can handle the maximum thrust of your pump, you should go ahead and double-check that and make sure, just to know, if there's something you can do to make an adjustment to protect your system from damage. Okay, the next thing on my list is, again, these are things that are in the sump. The protein skimmer I've been running now for over 5 years, I guess 6 years now, is the Nyos Quantum 300. It is the biggest Nyos skimmer on the market, and I love it. It's easy to clean except for one part. It is the right size for my aquarium. They initially rated it for 1,000 gallons, and I don't know if that's true. But it definitely keeps up with my system, which is a total water volume of 450 gallons. And I would say it's rated for 500 gallons. That's my own personal opinion, and I can be wrong. That's okay. But I don't think that I would feel the skimmer is up to the challenge of twice the water volume I have. I would probably want 2 of these skimmers side by side to do the job. Inside my protein skimmer, I've been running the same skimmer swabby that I've had for over 10 years that used to be in my Reef protein skimmer. It's a squeegee that turns inside the neck. And matter of fact, I think I left that turned on for the last 12 hours. Let me turn that off because it's supposed to be automatic on my controller. Let's see. Did I remember to turn that off? Swabby. Nope, still running. All right, so I'm going to set that back to auto. That has been corrected. Okay, so the Swabby is a squeegee that runs inside the neck. And I have it run for 2 minutes, 4 times a day. And it just keeps the neck clean. And I can remove the collection cup about once a month to clean out all the grunge that has accumulated on the lid and all over the squeegee apparatus itself. But the Skimmate drains into a waste collector. The waste collector holds, I don't know, maybe 2 gallons of, Skimmate, salt water and dissolved organic compounds and what looks like Phyto, and it could be brownish, greenish, it could be a little whitish after using lanthanum chloride to remove phosphate from the system. And I am very happy with the skimmer because I don't hear it. I have run protein skimmers in the past that were so loud that I would put them on a timer where I could shut them off while I'm watching a movie, or shut them off when I have company over, or shut them off when I'm trying to go to sleep. Just depends where the tank was and what room. And I needed some quiet, and some skimmers are loud. The Nyos skimmer is dead silent. I love it. When I unplug it and then plug it in, if someone's with me, they can barely make out the difference. And it's not because everything else is so loud. My entire tank is very quiet. The only part of my system that you actually hear is the water rippling at the surface from the random flow generators, those nozzles that push the water back into the tank. They create ripples and eddies, and it sounds like a little bit of a babbling brook at the surface. But you don't hear the drains, you don't hear the water going into the sump, you don't hear any of the water moving. It's great, and I love that about my system. And back in the day, I had a previous sump on this aquarium that was very loud where the water poured in, and I did everything I could possibly do to make it quieter. I put a lid on top of the overflow box. I put bulkheads into that lid. I ran plumbing through the bulkheads. I tried to trap it with, I filled it up with media from Seachem. I did all the things I could to muffle that sound, but it was kind of thunderous, and I hated that. And when I replaced the sump with an entirely different sump, I changed the way I did the drains into the system. And instead of having the drains go down into the sump, I had them going down next to the sump and enter through the sidewall under the water level. And I used gate valves on both of the skimmer section and the Refugium section to control how much water pours into each zone, and it goes in 100% bubble free. It is pure water going into the skimmer section and pure water going into the Refugium. There's no air bubbles. And then I have a third drain that could go into I have a thing called a sock box module, and there's no sock in it. But some water can trickle into that quietly, and that one has a lid, and you don't hear it. But if I wanted to divert all my water into the sock box, I can close the valve, go into the skimmer section and to the Refugium temporarily, and let all my water go right through a 7-inch, 200 micron sock and really capture a lot of whatever's in the water column that's concerning me. I very rarely do that. It's only been used a couple of times intentionally that way. Sometimes I would put a sock in there and let it run for a few days to polish the water, but I really hate cleaning filter socks. And I also made it a module that's removable from my sump where I could instead install a, fleece roller. Sorry, I was trying to think of the brand and the product all at once, and my brain just melted. So the fleece roller, I had one on there for a while. I got it from D&D Aqua Solutions, if I remember correctly, and I ran it for a while, and I just got tired of dealing with it. It wasn't that it didn't work, but it was not handling all the water of my tank. It could not handle all the water of my tank because it only has a 1-inch pipe going into it, and I have 3.5-inch drains. Even running at 50%, I have more water that can go through than what could go through the fleece roller. So instead, I had to run some water to the fleece roller, some through an extra drain, and I just kind of felt like I don't know that this is really making my life that much better. And I took it offline. I still own it. It's in my garage. I probably could give it a good bath and maybe put it into use at some point someday. I don't know, but I haven't felt the need. And so my system, essentially, what you're looking at. Oh, I'm sorry. This video just stopped. So rude. I apologize. Let me fix that so it doesn't do that again. The fleece roller could be implemented, but instead I just run an open system. So I don't even run filter socks unless I absolutely want to. And I don't really want to. Maybe 3 or 4 times a year I'll throw a sock inside the modular box in my sump. And that is all in the Sump video on this channel. So if you want to check that out, I think it's called a huge Sump upgrade or something like that. My new Sump, my upgraded Sump, something like that. About 6 years ago, I built a new Sump to replace the original one that I built for this tank. And that modular box just sits there. It's kind of just taking up space, but it's not doing anything. As you can see when you're looking at this video, there's not like particulates and stuff blowing around in the water. The water is clear. I give the credit to that to the protein skimmer. And then, of course, some of the sediment that does float around will settle down into the sump itself, and specifically in the refugium zone, which is filled up with reborn calcium reactor media. I use that instead of sand this go round because I found that it was easier to clean out. Okay, so I've kind of jumped around, but I've talked about the skimmer and I've talked about the return pump. The flow in the display tank you're looking at right now is supplied by 3 pumps, and that's 3 Vortech pumps from EcoTech Marine. I have 2 MP60s on the left. There's one right there on the left that you can see about halfway down the wall, and then there's one right behind it on the back blowing behind the rockwork, behind the corals. So I have 2 jets of water going that way, and then I have 2 return nozzles that you see right there above Spock. And then behind the hammer coral, which is the big green thing kind of under me right there, there is a 3rd Vortech. That's the MP40. And that MP40 blows forward toward the front glass of the tank from the back glass. It's pushing forward, and it's allowing that hammer coral to kind of pulse and move. I feel like the Vortech combined with the random flow generators makes that coral pulse. It's really neat looking. And when you're sitting there staring at it close up, it's just kind of like doing this. It's crazy. You would not think that's happening, and it's not happening from Vortech pumps at the other end of the tank that are 6 feet or 5 feet away. This tank is 7 feet long, and it's 3 feet wide, and it's 30 inches tall. It was made by Marineland, and it's Euro-braced on the bottom as well as on the top. So in theory, it should last me forever and ever and ever. But like I said, it's 11 and a half years old. Fingers crossed. Okay, the return nozzles, I've mentioned them a few times. They're 3D printed from Vivid Creative Aquatics, VCA. I sell them in my shop. I find them to be great, and they will fit on 1 inch. They have 3/4 inch. I think they even have smaller for like 1/2 inch fittings. If you're looking for those nozzles, I do sell some of them, and they're easy to clean. You can soak them in muriatic acid. I've tested that out. They don't melt. The reason I like these, they're called Flex. You can actually pinch and squeeze them because they're printed rubber, which is amazing. And while they do random flow, and so water is just shooting out different ways all the time, there's no moving parts. And the reason that it's made of this rubber was for the principle of being able to clean it more easily. If it got covered in coralline or something, as you squeeze, the coralline's going to snap and break off of it, which is kind of neato. But it doesn't damage the nozzle. And yeah, I've been using those nozzles now for several years. I used the original ones that were hard. And then when the Flex series came out, I took them off, put the Flex on instead, and I've been using them ever since. My lighting over the tank is 3 Neptune Systems Sky. I've been running those now for 4 years? I don't know. Feels like 5, but it could be 4 or 5. There's a video on this channel about my lighting. And if that was a 1 hour full review of the lights, I was the first guy in the United States to actually open the official packaging of the Sky lighting. It was an arrangement I made with Neptune Systems. Terrence flew out here to help me with the installation. We had to change my light rack. It was a whole ordeal. And then we popped those lights in there, and they have been lighting my reef ever since. I love them so much that when word got out that they were going to be discontinued, I scoured the nation and bought 3 more that are sitting in the back room as backup, so I have lights for another 5 years. Because eventually something's going to break, and I'm going to need it to be repaired, and I'm going to find a friend and say, can you please do whatever you can to bring this back to life? And if they say they can't, so be it, but if they can fix it, great. But in the meantime, I have extra lights ready to go, brand new in the box, never used. Very happy about that. What I like about the Sky, number one, I have multiple color spectrums that I can use. Using my controller, I can switch them from different modes. Like when I used to stand in front of the tank, I would switch the tank to streaming mode, and the tank was very yellow to the eye, but it looked fantastic on camera. It was the right color finally. I remember so many live streams, my tank just looked like garbage behind me, and it was me trying to make things work with metal halides and VHOs, and it just wasn't doing it. But with the skies, I was able to make some adjustments and to actually dial in that sweet spot to where the tank looked decent, even though it looked terrible if you were here in person. That yellow, oof, it was rough. But my back was to it, so it was okay. The lights also, so there was that yellow mode. Then I have a deep blue mode that I call Sell It All, which is a joke. It just means make everything glow so everyone wants to buy it. And then there is a 100% all channels, which kind of looks like the sun shining down on a coral reef near the beach. It looks very daylight, very normal to me. I like it a lot. It lets me see what I'm doing, and so there's that choice. And then I stole a schedule from Dwayne. He had something that was like an evening dim relaxation, where it was sort of blue, sort of dim. I use that occasionally on it as well. And then in addition to the 3 sky, which literally are covering a 7-foot by 3-foot footprint, which is great. I don't have shadows and deep spots or anything. I mean, obviously there's a big black hole there in this video because the coral has overgrown. But what I mean is there aren't like crossbar shadows. There aren't like this weird, thing that you would get from metal halide pendants that would, give you these hot spots. The way the light would penetrate the light and spread out before it came down, when you looked up at these, they actually looked like skylights that were mounted to the ceiling where the sunlight would be coming through a opaque white lens. That's how it looks to the eye. And of course, if you're being super critical, you could say, well, yeah, if I look super hard, I can tell it's a bunch of different LEDs that are inside circles. Yes, you can see all of that. But when you're just kind of looking at it from a distance, it looks like 3 skylights, which is why I call them skylights, but they're actually called sky, and they are lights. So I really do like. I wish you guys could still buy them to this day. You may be able to find 1 or 2 on the market as you look around, and people will sell things as they get out of the hobby. If you're looking for lights and you find a good deal, grab it, get them, because I don't think you'll be disappointed. Next to the 3 skies, I do have 2 very old Reefbrite XHOs. They're 6 feet long. They are super deep blue. They replace my super actinic VHO bulbs that I loved and wouldn't give up for the longest time. And I had those XHOs brand new in the box sitting by my front door for, I don't know, I'm going to say a year, while Tulio kept saying, Mark, just install them. And I finally did install them. And there's a video on this channel about the Reefbrite XHOs. So if you want to learn more about those, they are still for sale. They're still on the market. You can get those for supplemental lighting. I have them connected to a button where if I just need 10 more minutes of light on my tank, I can hit a button really quick on the side of my stand, and I can have a little bit of blue light. It's good if someone shows up early before the tank is woke up, but I want them to see a reef. I hit the button. 10 minutes later, they turn off again, and everything goes back to waiting for the normal schedule. The lights themselves are on a rolling light rack that I installed back in 2011. I probably built it in 2010. Maybe I built it in January 2011. But the rack was designed to hold a lot of weight, 100 pounds actually, which is a lot. When you think of lighting, you don't think 100 pounds. But I had to have the weight of the frame, which is about 20 pounds. And then I had installed black acrylic panels where the VHOs would be screwed on with their end caps. And I had black shelves where I'd put the ballast for the metal halide pendants. And I had 3 of those 400-watt ballasts. And then I had the light pendants themselves that weighed 20 pounds each. And they were made by Lumenbrite. They had a Starfire glass in them. They were incredible lights. I still actually own them. I don't know that I'll ever use them, but there's nothing wrong with them, and I hate to throw them away, so they're taking up space in my house. But the lights, the ballast, those pendants, and everything else, including the power strip that everything plugged into that talks to my controller, that added up to 100 pounds. And I had to be able to just take a fingertip and just push it forward, and the rack would just roll away and give me room into the tank so I could reach in there and work. And then I could pull the rack right back to position, and I love that. That rolling rack, I'm going to use that rack later today. Because yesterday, I got up on the walkboard, I stood in front of my aquarium, and there I am, eye level with the lights, and I took a look at the top of all my skies, and on the top of each sky, there's 2 circles that are a screen for ventilation, and they're all covered in white dust. So I'm going to roll the light rack back into the fish room, and I'm going to take down 1 light at a time, and I'm going to grab my handy dandy Dyson vacuum cleaner. I'm going to vacuum those screens, and then I'm going to grab my compressed air hose from the workshop where Minion is, and I'm going to blow them gently to kind of make sure that I've gotten rid of more dust. And then I'll reinstall them back in the light rack, and then I'll put the light rack back over the Reef. The beauty of that moving rack is that I can do all this without dropping anything in the water. I found the light rack to be super helpful over all the years I've worked in my Reef. I do love the ability to kind of nudge it out of my way, or to, just get it, completely out of the way as needed. It was made from a company called EasyTube, and when I reached out to them, they said, just tell us exactly what you need. We'll cut it all, and we'll ship it to you, and you just hammer it together like Legos. And I said, no, just send me the parts. I'll do my own cutting. And I regretted that. I really did regret that. I should have trusted them, but I was nervous because I'd never worked with it before, and I thought I might have to make some adjustments. I'm not positive. But in the end, I created a rectangle, and then I had to find exactly where the weight of the lights would be in that rack. So when it was suspended over the tank, I didn't want it to do this. I didn't want it to curl down. I was worried about that. If you put supports in the center and you got all this weight, it's going to hang like a banana. And so instead, I took everything and put it on that rack on top of 2 pieces of PVC pipe, and I moved the pipe back and forth under the rack until I could figure out where the rack stayed true and didn't hang down on the ends. And that was where I put my support rods that went up to the rolling assembly on the ceiling. And then, of course, I installed the assembly on the ceiling, and I did the rods down. I mounted the system to it. I put locking nuts on each of them so that they would never, ever, ever fall off. I was super adamant that I did not want this light rack to accidentally fall into the tank one day with me holding on to it. Like let's say I'm reaching up, and then I lose my balance, and I grab it, and the whole thing is going to come with me as I fall, right? And I was concerned that that was a risk, and so I built this in a way where I felt it could never fall. And it did not. It held up beautifully until Terrence showed up, and then when we had to take it apart to install the sky instead of my... And think about this. Those pendants I took out were 20 pounds each. That's 60 pounds of just reflector. We replaced them with 5-pound skies. Each sky weighs 5 pounds, the light itself. So that was amazing. I mean, I took the weight down from 100 pounds. I think my rack now is somewhere around 40 pounds total with everything on it, which is so much nicer. And it actually rolls even easier now. But when we were trying to remove the threaded rod, I had, because of my lack of trust that things will go wrong, that Murphy's Law is waiting, even where the rod threaded into the roller assembly, I forced a nut in there to screw on the very top so that it wouldn't just strip through the threads and collapse from the weight, from gravity pulling on it 24/7. And so when it was time to make this adjustment and change the rods to new ones that were shorter for the new lights because they could be up a little bit higher. No, the lights were hanging a certain height, and I wanted to bring them lower. Yeah, that's what it was. So I needed longer rods than what I already had. And I remember Terrence was not happy with me. He's like, oh my God, these are so difficult to take apart. And I was like, I know. The thought was I will never take them apart. They will hold together forever. And so we were able to remove those and get the rods changed out and get the light rack mounted 2 inches lower than it was, install the sky, putting them at the correct water height off the water, which is about 10 inches, and turned on the lights. And the minute the lights came on, the first thing that popped out of my mouth was, I should have done this 5 years ago. But at the same time, 5 years ago, at the time of me saying that, there was no sky. The choice on the market mainly was the Radions, and of course there was other brands on the market, but I just didn't like the look of what the tanks look like under Radions and other lights, under Hydras and all that. I kept seeing like the blue and red backscatter on the sandbed, and that bothered me. And the sky did not do that at all. I had that nice, what Terrence used to call it like a homogeneous, I think he said, where all the lights kind of coalesce into one beam of light. And it was impressive. It was very impressive, which is why I still love those lights. So, and then let's go back under the tank to the sump itself. The sump has a refugium zone. The refugium zone, it originally was 60 inches long, the full length of the sump. And when I replaced the sump, I decided to make the refugium only 48 inches long, intentionally so that way I could have some of the return zone be facing the living room. So imagine this. In the first sump, the entire length of the sump was refugium. You couldn't see anything other than plants and sand, and that was it. And you had to walk behind to see the skimmer zone and the return zone. It worked fine, but I wanted to see how much water was in the return zone visually, just an inspection. And the only way to see it was to walk into the fish room and check from behind. So I said, when I make the new sump, I'm going to make the refugium a little shorter, so now I can always see the return zone right from the living room, because I walk past the tank 100 times a day. And zero regrets. I love that. I totally love that about my system. And it also allowed me to have, instead of looking for a 5-foot light, which is weird and hard to come by, instead I was able to put a 4-foot VHO, which also came from Reefbrite. And in this case, the light was, I think he called it Plant Grow or Grow Light or some name like that. I don't know. I've had it for so long, I don't remember the true name. Even though I should, I just don't. I just know it's XHO. But the two chips that are in it, the two LEDs that are, what do you call it? In succession? No. Offset? I think that might be the right word, because you go 5100 Kelvin, 6500 Kelvin, 51 Kelvin, 65 Kelvin, and that's what it is, all the way down. And so when you look down on the surface of the water and look at the reflection of the lights, because you never want to look directly into LED lights, it's too bright. But if you look in the reflection, you can actually see the slight change in color, but it's all daylight. And I really like that. I like that I'm looking at green plants under daylight lighting, and the macroalgae just continues to grow. And my refugium is about half loaded with caulerpa right now. I will mention, it's not even on the list, so I'm just going to say it because it's on my mind. For cooling my tank, I rely on the air conditioner of the house. That's what I've always done. I didn't ever want to have a massive chiller that was running in my house, or even more so to buy what's called a split chiller, which is like the split AC systems where you have the chiller section in the house and you have this big unit outside that has the capacitors and the condenser and all the and the fans and all that kind of stuff. I was like, no, I don't want to be running these weird, pipes of Freon or whatever through the walls of my house, because the tank's kind of in the middle of the room and there's no, it's not like I would just have to go right through a wall. I'd have to go through 2 different walls with a 20-foot span in between. It would have been a whole nightmare. So I said, nope, I'm just going to use the temperature of the house to maintain the temperature of my reef tank. But if the tank were to get a little bit too warm, I've always relied on cooling fans. And these are fans that originally the brand was Icecap, and I really liked them a lot. They were big 4-inch fans, but they were designed for moisture. They handled the application of aquariums really well, and I've been running those fans forever. And about 3 months ago or so, I noticed that one didn't come on at all, and one was kind of twitching, which is kind of as bad as not coming on, and the third one was spinning. So I went ahead and I decided, well, there you go. That's the age of my sump. 6 years ago, I threw away all 3 fans and put 3 brand new fans on there. Again, they're Icecap. I keep those in stock in my shop. I sell the 80 millimeter, which is a 3-inch fan, and the 120 millimeter, which is the 4-inch fan. And when I made my sump, I made a spot specifically where I had my CNC machine cut out a recess the size of the fan, actually 3 fans. And so there's this little depression where the fans plop right into place. And they blow straight down on the water of the return zone, and they help to avoid the tank from getting warmer as the house gets warmer. It works really, really well, and it does it with no sound because those fans run very quietly. And if the tank continues to get warmer for some reason, like let's say the air conditioner breaks in the house, then in that case, I will go to 7-Eleven and I'll buy myself 8 bags of ice, like you would use for a party, and I will float 2 or 4 bags of ice in my sump at a time to help keep the tank temperature from getting too hot. During Markna a few years ago, when we had our big 24-hour live stream, the power was out in my house from 11 o'clock at night until, well, it was out for 24 hours. It was out. And when the power was out, I used a generator to keep the reef alive and to do the live stream. But the house was very hot. The living room was measured by the Apex controller at being 88 degrees, and my reef was inching up on, I think I caught it with the tank still around 79 something, like 79.8. It hadn't quite broached 80 degrees yet, which is good. And so I stopped the show really quickly to tell Dwayne to go buy ice and throw it in the sump, which he did. And the tank never got too hot, which we got lucky. And then finally, at 10 o'clock that night, the power came back on, and after about an hour, and it stayed on, I was like, okay, I believe them now. I went ahead and I stopped the entire broadcast. We reset everything. We moved all the plugs. We switched everything back off the generator back to normal power. And by 3 in the morning, the house was the right temperature. But the Reef tank stayed stable the whole time thanks to fans. And also, I did have a big fan on top of the Reef too. So I had my little fans, which you would think, well, that could not have taken care of 450 gallons of water. You're right. It helps a little bit. It's just a little thing that costs you nothing that helps with temperature control. But if you're in a dire circumstance, like a power outage I was dealing with a very hot house during August when it's crazy hot in Texas, I did have a big fan that I bought from Home Depot, some kind of a floor fan that, you would set it on the floor, but you can set it on a kitchen counter. You can set it anywhere you want. It's a round-looking fan. It's made by Rigid. It's $80. I just looked it up recently. It's the same price. So if you're looking for this type of fan, you can find it. And I had it plugged into my Apex specifically that if the temperature of the room got too warm, this fan will turn on automatically and blow down on my Reef tank. And that was actually running during the live stream. While I was in this room sweating to death, the fan was keeping the Reef temperature down, even though the house was getting hotter and hotter. But I didn't think about it because I was busy with the show. And it was somewhere around maybe 4 or 5 p.m. when it occurred to me that if I ran one more extension cord from the spider web of cords we ran everywhere, including outside to the outside building, I could get a connection to a switch. Now, a switch is a part of it's a thing that all your Ethernet cables go into. And it's used for networking, and that thing is under my television, where I have my Apple TV and I have my my Reef Link that talks to the EcoTech gear and whatever. It also had an Ethernet cable that comes from the Apex to the switch. Well, that whole TV system was offline while the power was out because we were busy with the show. Who's going to be watching TV? But I had a living room full of people that was helping with support of the show. And I thought, let's run a cord over there so if they want to flip on the TV, they could have something. And as soon as they did that, I started getting notifications on my phone that the house was too hot, that the tank was warming up, I was connected again. I was like, and that's when it popped into my skull. What's the Reef temperature? and I checked it. And so I was able to ask Dwayne to help. But in all the years of running the 400-gallon Reef, and the first one started, I first set it up was 2011. This is 2025. So we're talking 14 years total from Reef 1.0, that lasted 13 months before it sprung a leak, and then the next one, which has been running for 11 and a half years. Out of all those years, there's only been 3 days where I had to put ice in my sump to protect the Reef from getting too hot. So that's why I don't own a chiller and don't have any desire to have one. I don't feel the need. I feel like I've got a workaround. Now, right now, I have a wonderful AC system, a split AC in the garage where Minion is, the CNC machine, and that AC keeps that room a wonderful temperature all year round. Great, nice and cool during the hot summer, but it also warms it in the winter, which is amazing. Now, here's the beauty of it. There is a door from the fish room that goes straight into that room where Minion is, where the CNC machine is. And if I was in a pinch, I could close the door to the fish room that faces the living room. The temperature of the aquarium would be potentially helped with the cold air coming through the door from the garage to the fish room. So I could leave that door open, even possibly put my fan that I talked about, the $80 rigid fan, I could put on top of the CNC and tell it to blow cold air right at the Reef tank, right into the fish room, and help to keep that tank from getting too warm. If for some reason my HVAC for the entire house was down temporarily. I will also add that at some point a few years ago, I can't remember exactly when I did it, but I was getting all new ductwork installed in the attic. I mean, they took out the entire octopus and they put all new in. And I said, run me a duct from this entire ecosystem of AC into the fish room. So it just puts some cool air in there automatically. And I'm not relying on it to keep that room nice and cool, but it sure does make the room feel better than it did in the past, where the room would be warm from the heat of the lights and, of course, the humidity of the tank. And now I've got this gentle, cool air coming in through a 6-inch vent. It's not really big. It's just a little bit, but at least it provides some cool air to the room, which benefits keeping the tank temperature where it needs to be anyway. It's all worked out. In addition, because I don't run metal halides anymore and I'm running LED lighting, my tank temperature dropped 2 degrees anyway, to where the tank is not dealing with the heat coming off metal halide bulbs. That was a real ongoing thing that I was contending with for many, many years, and I didn't have to worry about that anymore once I used LED lighting, which has been really nice. Another thing that's in the fish room that is part of the AC ecosystem is the vent on the ceiling. Now, I installed a vent fan in my fish room a very, very long time ago, back when I had the 280-gallon Reef. And it ran for many years, and then finally it burned up, and I had to get a new one. And then when I built the new system for the 400-gallon, I decided, while the ceiling is wide open, put in a brand new vent fan. And when you're looking for a vent fan, I mean, there's lots on the market, and there's lots of choices too. But for me, I could go to Home Depot or Lowe's and just look at the ones they sell for the bathroom. And I went and looked for the one with the lowest number of sones, S-O-N-E-S. Sones is the decibel level of what the fan will sound like, and if the number's high, it's very loud. And some people want a loud fan in the bathroom for privacy reasons, because they don't want people knowing what's happening in there. But for a ventilation fan in a fish room, I just want to take out warm, humid air. I just want to draw it out, and I want to draw it out 24 hours a day. And so I want a fan that moves air, but it does so quietly. So I found a fan that was 1.0 sones, which is nothing. You have to put your ear on it to hear it. And I put that on the ceiling of the fish room right directly above the reef tank, where at the time, I had metal halides, and I thought all that heat coming off those lights will go straight in the fan, through the attic, and out the whirlybird, and it's gone. I'm not even heating up the attic. I actually took a hose from the fart fan, that's what they're called, and sent it all the way up to the whirlybird, and I zip tied it into the whirlybird, and it took that hot air. And when you stood behind my house, I had 3 whirlybirds on the roof. One was spinning like crazy because that fan was blowing on it from inside. It was pushing that hot air from the fish room, and it was making the whirlybird spin quicker than the other 2 that only moved from the wind outside. So on a low windy day, I have 2 whirlybirds that are just doing this. And then I had this other one, whoa! And I knew the fan was working. I didn't have to hear it. I didn't have to check. I didn't have to get on a ladder. I just had to just look at the back of the house to know if it was working. And then when the tank leaked, I had to replace the tank. I said, this is the perfect time. I'm going to move that fan away from over the tank, and I'm going to put it over the concrete. And the reason I chose to put the vent fan over the concrete instead of over the reef itself is because it was accumulating, dirt, particles on it, and sometimes there would be some kind of condensation, and that stuff would drip off and land on my lights, and I didn't like that. And I thought I'd much rather have it drip on the floor of the fish room where I can mop it up if it happens. And also, now when I take the screen off to clean it, I'm doing it directly over the concrete floor, and I'm not drizzling stuff into my reef. So it was one of those choices that made sense. Now, just so like I said, there's other things on the market, and I have seen some kind of a fan that's round, sort of like a donut with a pipe going through it, and you could put that anywhere. You could put that in your attic, you can put it in the wall, you can put it wherever you want it, and then you run hose to where you want to draw air from, and you run hose wherever you want to send the air to. And so you don't actually have to install the square fart fan in your ceiling. You could install this donut somewhere and just have a nice clean duct cover plate that you see, visibly in your fish room. So if you're trying, you said, I can't put that fan because maybe your room is too far inside. Like some people might say, well, if this room faced an exterior wall, I could totally put a fan there and just draw it right out, but I can't. That's where you would use this inline fan instead. Costs you a little bit more, obviously, but it's another way of moving air from one room to another in a nice, safe way, and also keeping the noise away because the motor is not directly in your fish room. Okay. Since I mentioned the Refugium and we were talking about equipment that's over it, I do want to mention there's no pumps in there for flow. It is just the water draining from the tank is going in. And generally speaking, I like to send 75% of the water that drains from my tank into the skimmer section and 25% goes into the Refugium. I don't have a way to actually prove that's the true number. Maybe it's 80% skimmer, 20% Refugium. It's just sort of a thing I eyeball, but I just open the gate valve just enough to create flow where the water's moving through and pouring through the teeth at the far end and sending the water into the return zone. And that has worked beautifully, and it doesn't clog up with anything because it can't. Water's coming in through a bulkhead and just streaming into the system. And then, like I said, at the bottom, instead of sand, I used reborn calcium reactor media, big, large nuggets of basically coral bones that are, that we would use normally to dissolve. I just use it as substrate. I like the look of it. I like that I can scooch it over and there's all this detritus and I can pump that out and then scooch it the other way and to scoop out that detritus. It's just a nice way to keep it clean. And I found that to be a little bit better than using sand like I have in the past. All right. The next piece of equipment under my tank is the algae turf scrubber. I have a FourSquare Aquatics APIS 300. It's the big one. It has a screen inside of it, inside a drawer that you can pull out. You remove the screen, you clean it, you put it back in, you shove the drawer back into place. It traps all the light inside of itself. There's no light shining out anywhere. And I have that running for the lights run for, I think, 10 hours a day. And it allows the algae to grow on the screen. I have not been able to get to it for years because of the temporary aquarium I set up for the clownfish and anemones that's been behind my reef. And, I've talked about it incessantly. I'm just telling you, I'm just being honest. It's just been a neglected tool in my arsenal, and I'm looking forward to getting that anemone cube operational like I've talked about so many times. I feel like I should just stop everything I'm doing with my life and only do that. But there's times where I'm very motivated but not have the time, and then there's times where you would think I had the time but I'm hurting so much, I'm actually sick, with pain, that I just can't do it, and so it just, the project gets put off and put off. So ultimately, I'm looking forward to being able to use that tool the way it's supposed to be used. I probably should have unplugged it 3 years ago instead of doing what I've been doing with it, which is moving the tank out of the way to get the drawer out, to clean it, to put it back, put the tank back in place. It's not something I'm willing to move every 10 days like I should. It's too much of a hassle, and so it gets neglected, and it's causing a little bit of problems for water quality in my tank, and it's all my fault. Enough about that. When it comes to the additives in my tank, what do I use to keep my alkaline, calcium, magnesium levels where they need to be? I've been running the same calcium reactor from Lifereef for 21 years. And one day it's going to just break. But so far it hasn't broken. Little pieces have broken, and I replaced those little pieces, or I eliminated them because they were unnecessary to what I needed. And I fill that reactor with Reborn probably 4 times a year, which is shocking to me now. I mean, back in the day when I set up the calcium reactor for the very first time, I thought, wow, this is a lot of media. And it uses a Mag 7 pump on the side that circulates the water within the reactor at all times. It's always running 24 hours a day. And then you'd use a small power head to push water into the reactor, and it would drip out the other side, and you controlled the flow rate. Well, I've changed that a little bit over the last, probably 5 years ago. Well, actually longer. I did the MaxiJet attachment for a long time to push water in, and then eventually I replaced it with something called a Manifold. So I took a single pump and I ran it into a PVC pipe assembly with multiple valves. And one valve was specifically to feed water to the calcium reactor. A couple other valves did other things. And this was my system for a long time. And then one day I was like, I could get all this Manifold thing entirely, and I could instead use a dosing pump to push water into the reactor. And so I've been doing that, and I've done that with different things over the years. I've used different pumps. I had this big, huge machine that I got that was made for a hospital, and it took up a lot of space. Think about a box of shoes. Now think bigger. That's what I had. Bigger than a shoebox. And this thing would just quietly turn the wheels and move water through the reactor. But I really wanted to replace it with something different. And then when I was at a Macna, they had a new pump from Comor. FXSTP was the model number. And I was like, oh, it's so much smaller than what I have. I mean, it was the size of a coffee cup. I was like, yes, please. That sounds great. A little bit bigger. And so I stuck it under my tank, and it was just doing its thing. And the only problem was it went click, 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 and it would not stop. I couldn't make it be silent. And unfortunately, I could hear this clicking all the time throughout the whole house. I could be in my bed trying to go to sleep, and there it was, click, 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 click. Great, I know the pump is working, but that is terrible. And so when the Versa came out and I could get my hands on one, because original, you couldn't even get them. They were just so hard to come by. And when I finally got my hands on one, I was so excited to replace the click, click, click with dead silence, and I did, the Versa pump. And I've used it for many, many years now. I did pick up a Soul that I have not installed yet because I don't have somewhere to screw it into. And it can't just freestand. It has to be screwed onto something. And I haven't come up with a master plan. And I definitely will when the temporary anemone tank is out of my way, because now I will be able to plan my fish room again. But right now, while I have this big block of water in my way, it changes, other changes. So I'm still using the Versa pump. And it pushes water into the reactor at 60 milliliters per minute. I have a CO2 tank that's a 20-pound cylinder that lowers the pH within the calcium reactor, which melts that reborn media, which provides alkalinity and some calcium to my tank 24 hours a day. The 60 milliliters a minute, I think, comes out to 14 gallons of effluent a day that goes into my reef. And, I started to say this before, and I didn't forget. When I first set up the calcium reactor in the beginning, I thought, wow, that's a lot of media. It's going to last me forever. It turns out, I think someone told me you got to refill that in like 6 months. I was like, what? Because I felt like I had a year's supply. And true enough, somewhere between 5 and 6 months, it had to be replaced. With my 400 gallon, I've been having to replace missing media probably every 8 to 10 weeks, which is pretty frequent. I mean, it's pretty shocking. I miss the days of doing it every 5 to 6 months because I have to go under the tank, and I have to pop off the lid and clean the inside of the acrylic because it's getting all mucked up, and then add more media on top, put it back on top, and get it all operational again. And it's not the end of the world, but it's a little bit more frequent than I would have expected. But it's been keeping my alkalinity right between 9 and 10 DKH where I like it. Now, a calcium reactor's effluent should measure between 19 and 35 DKH. So if you're running a calcium reactor and you're not sure what's going on with your alkalinity, measure the liquid pouring out of your calcium reactor with your test kit. And hopefully your test kit measures high enough. I use Elo's test kits for alkalinity, and so sky's the limit. I have actually taken baked baking soda ash, mixed it with a gallon of water, like I made a batch. And I remember measuring that with my Elo's test kit. I thought I was going to use up the whole kit. I think, and I could be wrong, because it's been so long since I did this, and I really should do another test for funsies just to get the knowledge in my head again. But I feel like the effluent was something like 80 DKH off that solution. Might have been higher. So if you have some solution and you want to tell me what you've mixed up some alkalinity for 2-part dosing, if you want to tell me what the DKH of that solution is, I'd love to know. You can put it in this video's comments. You can send me a message. I'd really like to know what the number is you get. All right, then for magnesium, my calcium reactor can't help with that. So I actually put in Magnesium Pronto, which is from Two Little Fishies. I sell it on my site. It's a product that costs you $20 for a jar, and it makes a lot of magnesium. One jar makes somewhere not quite 5 gallons. Let's call it 4.2 gallons of solution for $20. And it's anhydrous powder inside the jar. And it is 1 tablespoon either per 12 ounces or per 10 ounces. Ask me later and I'll double check for you. But I have a jar that used to hold pretzels. It holds 120 milliliters. Okay, yeah, per 12 milliliters. That is 1 tablespoon per 12 ounces of water mixes up the solution. So I fill up my jug with 120 ounces of water, and I put in 10 tablespoons of that magnesium pronto. I stir it up. It becomes clear. I hook it up to a dosing pump. I have this old Icecap dosing pump, and it trickles in 80 milliliters a day, every day, for about a month. And when the jug is empty, like it is today, I take the jug off the system. I go into the kitchen. I clean the jug out to make it nice and clean again. And then I fill it up with new water and more magnesium pronto, and that is my magnesium. So that calcium reactor and that dosing pump are the two things that dose my system. Then in addition to that, I dose PRODIBIO every 15 days. I've been doing it for 12 years, 13, 14 years. And, 14, 15 years. And PRODIBIO is no longer around, but I still have a stash, which is fortunate for me. I like using it in my system. It adds bacteria and some denitrification, some bacteria that consumes waste, and it adds strontium and it adds iodine. And my strontium, my iodine levels are always correct whenever I do an ICP test. So it's super easy. I don't have to measure anything. I break open a vial and pour that into the tank every 15 days. And I've been doing it, and I'll keep doing it until I run out, and then I'll have to figure out the next thing I'm going to use. But that has been my system. And then the only other additive that I use is going to be Phosphate RX, and that's to remove phosphate from the system. And I do that, it used to be 5 times a year, but because of my algae turf scrubber debacle, which is all my fault, I'm doing it more frequently, probably every 2 months, and it just knocks the phosphates down. So if my tank is 0.6 ppm, which is a lot, I will use Phosphate RX, and then the next day it is 0.1, which is nice and low, and my tank tends to live somewhere in the 0.1 to 0.5 range. And I have the Trident NP that measures phosphate once a day, every single day. And it's been doing it now for 16 months. I just had to change the reagents on that reactor, on that device. And every time you get a new package of reagents, you get a calibration solution bottle. And there's 8 bottles in front of my tank. Now, maybe I used one, so maybe it's been even longer. But there's 8 unused bottles of calibration solution because I haven't found the need to calibrate incessantly like some people do. I just do it on occasion if there's a need, or if I have serious doubts the numbers are lying to me. Okay? The next thing on the list, controllers. So I have been using the same brand of controller on my Reef since 2004. I got one that came with the tank used, and it was damaged, and I sent it in for repair. And back then it was called the Aqua Controller 2. Then later on they came out with the Aqua Controller 3, which I had. And then they came out with the Apex, which is not what you see today. It was this bar that had a black label on the front. And at this point, people would refer to that as the Apex Classic. But then a new Apex came out that had an orange and white label. And that still was not the Apex people use to this day. Even though there's still some in operation that totally work. Now they have the one that kind of looks like a clamshell looking thing. It's silver and orange, and that is the Apex 2016. And that is the Gen 1 of that version of Apex. I'm using the Gen 2, so Apex A2 is what I'm using. And that probably came out in 2018, and then the A3, I believe, came out somewhere around 2020. I'm using the A2. And the A2 Apex talks to 2 EB832s, which are Energy Bar 832. There are 8 outlets. There are 3 ports for 1 links, and there are 2 12-volt plugs, 832. So the EB832, I have 2 of those under my tank. And there's various things plugged in, like my skimmer, those fans I talked about, the lights for the turf scrubber, my return pump, and I also have all my different dosing pumps that need to operate, or my top-off system. They're plugged into the other EB832, and so I've got those that are tracking the energy of the tank. They measure the incoming power coming in, and when the electricity was coming into my house incorrectly, and I had things beeping and chirping at me because the voltage was wrong coming into my house, I called the power company repeatedly until they finally did solve the problem. They kept trying to blame my house. They tried to blame the meter. They tried to blame everything under the sun. And I told them, this is not my house. You guys are bringing in bad power, and I can prove it. And I had weeks of graphs that the Apex had tracked. Plus, I had the Hydros controller on Caitlin's Reef, and it had weeks of graphs where I could show as well what was going on with the power coming in, that it was coming in at like 96 volts instead of 110. Or it would come in at 130 volts. You know, it was just all over the place. And like I said, they kept trying to blame the house. And one guy that came from the power company, a linesman, said, look, the thing on the outside of your house that the meter's connected to, that is the wrong size for the breaker panel inside. I'm like, I don't think that's true. And he said, the outside box has to match the breaker panel inside. You can't just have two different sizes. This is clearly the problem is this box. I just totally didn't believe him. And about 3 weeks later, I just noticed nothing was beeping and chirping at me. And I was like, oh, they finally fixed it. They found the problem somewhere upstream, like I told them, for a month and a half. And during that whole time, I was lucky I didn't have things burn up. I did end up losing like a power supply to like a Vectra pump or something. Like one of those black bricks just started smoking, and I had to unplug it because the voltage was so bad coming into this house. But nothing else broke. And I knew it was not just my system or blaming the Apex or whatever, because you could hear my microwave make different sounds. You could hear a hairdryer make different sounds, because it would speed up and slow down. I could hear my AC making different sounds. The TV would flicker. Lights, of course, were flickering. It was insanity. And I was really, really frustrated with that. But the controller let me see the power coming in. Now, what about the power I'm using? It also tracks all the things that are running on my tank that are plugged into it. And I also have two other energy bars. They're the old ones called the EB4. Now, the EB4 was designed specifically for high wattage items, like metal halide bulbs, like heaters. Those of you that love those huge heaters, where you're like 1,000 watts, that's a perfect heater, I want that. Well, the EB4 would be way more conducive for possibly running such a large heater, but I've never bought that size heater. My own reef tank has three 300-watt heaters, and those 3 heaters are plugged into 3 outlets of the EB4, the Energy Bar 4. The EB4 has 4 outlets, and 3 are used by heaters, and the 4th one is for that skimmer swabby, the squeegee that cleans my protein skimmer. And then on the top of my system, when we had the big ice storm that took out our power here in in all of Texas, and 20 million people had no power, when my generator decided to blow up and go bang, bang, and the whole house got really bright for a nanosecond, and then everything went pitch dark, it burned up my EB8, which was this old school energy bar with 8 outlets, and it cooked it. But I had another EB4 in my arsenal, and that EB4 has been on top of my tank since 2021, and all my lights are plugged into that. So the Apex controls all these things and gives them power, and it measures the power they're using. So the EB832 specifically has something called power monitoring. The EB4s do not. They just have total wattage used or total amperage used. So I can just know the EB4 with the 3 heaters turned on is pulling 11.6 amps or something. And it's like, okay, but it won't tell me what each outlet's pulling. I don't know if one heater's using more than another because of that. That is old school energy bar, not like the modern one. The EB832 will tell me the wattage of every single outlet at any given time. Like right now, if I hop onto my Apex and right there on my screen here, I'll switch this from this video for a second. So here is my Apex Fusion right now, and at the top here it says 276 watts, 3 amps, 119 volts coming in, and then down here my Refugium light is using 25 watts, my MP60 is using 18 watts, the Versa pump that's feeding the calcium reactor is using 2 watts, the other MP60 is using 21 watts, the Abyzz pump is using 167 watts, the Skimmer is using 42 watts, and that's with 2 pumps. No, I'm sorry, that's only 1 pump. The other pump is plugged into something else. The CO2 tank's using 1 watt, and the fans are turned off, so 0 watts. And then the other one is the algae turf scrubber. It's not running right now. The lights are off, so it's 0 watts. The light over the anemones is 28 watts. It's a Kessel. And then I have a magnesium doser, a top-off, a Versadoser, and a Camor doser, and all of them say 0 watts right now because none of them are doing anything. Well, why did I get so close? Can we back that up a little bit? Just a little bit. There, it's a little bit better. Okay. In addition to... wow, this camera's moving all over the place. In addition to the controller with everything plugged in and using certain amount of wattage, if something doesn't use enough wattage, if for some reason the skimmer is using more power than usual or less power than usual, power monitoring will send me a notification to let me know there's a problem. Like, for example, if I turn off a pump, like I turn off a Vortech and just don't think about it, power monitoring has the ability to notify me that this pump is off. Like, okay, here's the thing. The pump is set to run. It's set at auto in the Apex Fusion, and so that pump should just run. Now, if I'm working on the tank and I just reach over there and pull the power cord out of the Vortech so it just goes off, the power brick is still getting power from the Apex. The Apex is still feeding it. But it's not using any wattage because there's no pump receiving because I pulled the plug out. And so I will get a notification an hour later saying MP60R, which would be the one on the right, is measuring 0 watts. And I'm like, oh, and I run over there and I plug it back in. It's a nice way to keep track of gear to know if it's working correctly or not. If my return pump uses, what did I say it used? Like, let's say, I think I said 168 watts. So my power monitoring is probably going to measure between 150 and 175 watts. When we had the power glitch happening in my neighborhood where the voltage was coming in low and high, that pump was also fluctuating, and I get a notification saying that the pump was in distress, basically. And so I went from 80% and I took it down to 70%. And the beeps and all that stopped. Like, okay, good. And then the beeps returned because, again, the fluctuating voltage was bad coming from the city. And I adjusted it again down, and I adjusted down. And finally, I was like, I can't run the pump. I mean, I need you guys to fix this power, city. This is ridiculous. Fix it. And I was very lucky that I didn't burn up my Abyzz pump. Let me do that so it'll stop moving around. Sorry, I can just see it bouncing around as I'm just doing stuff. Okay. The Apex measures my temperature. It measures the air temperature of the room because I have another probe plugged in to literally tell me what the room temperature is. And I have that set to also notify me if the tank room gets too cold or gets too warm, just as a notification. And that's what happened during Markna. It gave me a notification the room's too hot. And I was glad to know that. It also gives me salinity readings, ORP readings, and pH readings. So and I don't live by those numbers, but I am able to look at them. I'm able to just open my phone and double check, open my iPad, look on my computer. That's the beauty of the Fusion. You can do that. And for all you Hydros users, you have pretty much the same principle, same abilities. It's just done differently. And I do run the Hydros on the tank behind me, and I run the Hydros on Caitlin's Reef, and I use different settings in there to let me know wattage. Like, for example, 2 days ago, I unplugged the bubbler that is in Caitlin's Reef because I want to take the lid off and I wanted to clean it because it was growing algae underneath the acrylic. And if I were to allow it to keep bubbling while the lid is off, it's going to spatter all over the wall behind the tank, and I don't like that. So I just pulled the plug. And then I left it hanging out of the cabinet door, but didn't actually plug it back in. And a little while later, I got a notification from Hydros saying that the bubbler is using 0 watts of power. And it's to remind me, plug it back into the UPS, so that way I have bubbles in the tank no matter what. Whether there's power or there's a power outage, that tank doesn't lose total circulation. All right. I do have a manifold pump in place. Even though I took the calcium reactor off of it, I have 2 other things I can run. One is running water into the algae turf scrubber I mentioned earlier. And the second one is to run into a reactor of carbon that I have not done in like 8 or 9 months. I just stopped doing it mainly for a lack of space. I just don't have a place for it to put it in there easily and get it out easily. I need that temporary tank out of the way. I need it gone. I need to make myself find the time this week to get that other damn tank running, or at least get it up on the stand and get it plumbed in so I can start getting closer to moving that livestock and getting rid of that temporary tank, because it's totally messing with my reef mojo and I don't like it. The manifold pump is a Vectra M2. Might be an L2. I might have told you wrong. It might be an L2. And so that pump, I had an L, it could be an L1 or an L2. I think it's an L2. I had one for a long time, and then finally it failed and I had to replace it. But that provides flow to 3 different controlled plumbing fittings. And it's just a matter of turning a valve. So it's very manual, but it's great because it's one pump. It draws water from the return pump section of my sump, and it just pushes it into whatever I need. And it doesn't have anything to do with the return pump. I can literally turn off the return pump, and the manifold keeps doing its job. Keeps everything the way it's supposed to be. And I really like that. And having a manifold pump, having one pump do multiple pieces of gear, is so much more efficient than having a single pump on every single piece of gear you own. Just like when you are dosing multiple things, and you could have lots of dosing pumps, or you get one dosing pump with 4 heads on the front. And the beauty of that is that you have the ability to have one thing plugged in the wall that runs 4 different doses. It's the exact same principle, just using a manifold, using a pump. All right, we'll go back to this video because that was nice. Plus, you guys always say I don't get to see your tank enough, so you're seeing it as it was today. Inside my garage, through the wall behind the fish room, I have 4 deep cell Duracell batteries. They're big 12-volt batteries like you might put in a car or on a boat or in a motorcycle, just big ones. And they've been in operation for 4 years. I think they're at the end of their life. I recently was doing some testing, and they were not holding up, even though they're still grabbing a charge, but they're dissipating much too rapidly. My friend Mike Rhoda, that came here to help me with the installation back in 2021, is out of town right now, so I got to wait a couple more weeks for him to come back. But when he does, he told me about some other batteries that are better, and I'm thinking we'll be switching them out pretty soon here, because those batteries keep my Vortech pumps running and my Vectra pumps running. So I told you the Vectra's on the manifold. There's also a Vectra on the frag system, which is the return pump. So having those both running during a power outage is best. My big water vat that I mix salt water in, it has a Vectra pump, but it's just standalone. It's a 250-gallon poly tank, and I use Fritz salt when I mix up a batch of salt water. And then I use the water up over time, over a period of many months until it's finally empty. This last batch that I've been using is probably 6 months old, and it's just constantly circulating with the M2 pump. It's just doing this. That's all it's doing all the time. And then when I need some, like to do a water change on the low 1-gallon tank or the 20-gallon tank, Caitlin's reef, the frag system, or my main reef, I just grab some water and use it up. And then when the container is nearly empty, that's when I refill it with brand new RODI water, add some salt to it, get it back to 1.026, and then I just let it circulate. My top-off system, well, let's talk about the RODI. I've been selling RODI systems probably since 2002, 2003. Initially, I was just drop shipping them. I was the one that handled the transaction, and a company would build and ship them to the customers. And then somewhere in the later 2000s, I said, stop building them, just send me the parts, I'll build them myself. And so I've been building RODI systems now for a long time, and I've been doing product support for people when they had questions. I have a huge section on my website that documents how to work on the RODI system to repair anything that may be going wrong. And, it's an FAQ section. And I myself use the 150-gallon a day boosted RODI system, which is a nice system. It's very robustly built, and it has a booster pump on top, and it has a nice dual TDS meter built in. It has a pressure gauge. It does all the things I need. And that 150-gallon a day system provides water for all of my aquariums in this house, plus my ice maker in the refrigerator, plus my drinking water and making tea or coffee that's right on my kitchen sink. I love that system. It's rock solid, and it also sends water to the fish room through 25 foot of RODI tubing that goes through the cabinet space above my kitchen cabinets. I was going to say the crawl space, but you can't crawl through there. But it's just running the tubing into the fish room, so I never have to carry a bucket of water anywhere. And I love that. I'm able to just open the valve, burn off the first minute of bad water. That's, so there's a thing called TDS creep. I've talked about it many times on this channel. And what I do is when I turn on my RODI system, I turn on the RO system, and I let that water go into a nearby cup. It collects about 4 ounces of water. It takes about 90 seconds. And now my TDS is super low again. It's down to like maybe 2 coming out of the tubing. And then I close that tap I was using, and I open the DI and send that water into the fish room, and it sends water into my top-off reservoir. I have a 43-gallon top-off reservoir under my reef tank. It fits there right to the right of the sump, and it holds about 10 to 11 days worth of water. I never have ever, in all these years, drained it down to the bottom. I've always gotten it down to about 6 inches or so. And I never put my hand in there. I try never, ever to put anything in there. Obviously, you have a pump that has to go in there. I do have the LLS, which is the liquid level sensor. I had to install that, but I never take it out. I don't lift the lid. I want it to stay pristine. So then once, like every couple of years, if I stick a TDS meter in there just to measure the water in that container, it's measuring 1. It's like, okay, nothing has polluted this water. I don't want to have 0 TDS water going into a reservoir that is making it 20 or 40 or 80 TDS. You want your reservoir to be pristine, sealed, just keep as much out of it as possible is my recommendation. When I made this top-off container, it replaced the previous one that was maxed out. I made one that held a little bit more water. I think it held 46 gallons, and it was within a half an inch of the stand, and I couldn't get it out. And when I replaced the sump, that was my opportunity to remove this and put in a new one that if I needed to remove it for some reason for cleaning, I could remove it without having to take out all the plumbing and the sump and everything to get the top-off container out. So I made a slightly smaller one, and it's great. And that's been running now for the last 6 years. No flaws, no issues. After all these years, the top-off pump, the ATK PMUP, which is just pump spelled backwards, my version 1.0 finally burned up a couple of months ago, and I installed the V2, which is just a slightly better one that was designed not to overheat and burn out. The first one did, and I think the reason it burned out for many people, they let their container run dry. Well, since my container's never empty, that's never happened to me. But finally, one day, it just stopped pumping water, and when I tried to take apart the version 1.0 pump, the impeller would not move. It was frozen in there, and even with needle nose pliers, the fins were breaking off. I could not extract it. It was swollen into it, and it was just toast. So I got a good 6 years out of that pump, and there's a new one in there. Hopefully it'll last me 6 years too. We'll see. I don't know. But I have a float valve built into my top-off reservoir. So as the water goes into the reservoir, it just keeps going and going until it raises the float valve, and that puts back pressure on the line, which then makes the RODI attempt to cycle itself off. It really can't do it because it's not a closed valve. It is a rubber flap that is trying to keep the water from bleeding in. And so I can hear my RODI system doing this weird surging sound, like and if my TV is loud enough, I don't notice it for a little bit. But then when I finally do hear it, I'm like, oh, and I run over there and I close the valve that leads to the fish room, and the RODI turns off completely, and it's off until I need to make water for the aquarium again. The sump itself that I built, I've talked a little bit about it, but the entire sump is a custom-made one I made myself. It's a Melev Reef sump, just like it's a Melev Reef top-off container. The sump is mathematically measures 150 gallons. If you were to take the length, width, and height and just divide by 231, I probably run it around close to 100 gallons in the sump. And when I do a water change, I can pump out roughly 80 gallons out of there when I'm doing that. And I told you about the section where it's built for the fans. I have a different section of the sump on the back side where there's an actual part that was cut in a way to allow me to put the Trident on the top corner. And my Trident sits there, which measures my alkaline calcium several times a day. And that has been wonderful. I love that. And I told you also that I have the plumbing coming in through the side of the sump instead of through the top. And that has been wonderful as well. It's super easy to dial in. If I have to adjust the knob for the way the drain, the water drains in, we're talking about like once every 2 years. The only reason I have to touch it is because I had to touch it. Like I was doing something and I messed with something, like I have to make an adjustment. But other than that, I never touch it. I don't do anything with it at all. My overflow box on the tank itself has a lid that's made of polycarbonate, which keeps all the light out of there, so I never have algae growing in there. But I do have sponges that grow in there and vermitid snails. So from time to time, once a year, once every 16 months or so, I get motivated to get up there and chip all those things out and kind of just declutter the overflow box so it's cleaner, wipe it all down, and then restart the return pump. The stand that the aquarium is on is a 1/4 inch thick steel stand. It was made in 2010 by a local welder. It's 84 inches long, 36 inches wide, 38 inches tall, with an incorporated removable walkboard that fits on the front or the back of the tank. And the walkboard is the full length. And it's always installed on the tank. I mean, almost never is it not installed. The ability to take it and put it somewhere else so that it's just a nice clean walk in the house, it's nice, but no, I always have the walkboard there. If I were not to have it, on the front side, I'd have it on the back side. And that way I can work on the reef from behind by just walking across. I love my walkboard. There's a super short video on my channel, maybe 90 seconds, where I demonstrate the walkboard, and it's I've had so many people comment, "That is so stupid. All you need is a step ladder." I'm like, you have no idea what you're talking about. The walkboard is one of the best decisions I came up with when I designed this system, because it allows me to walk the full length of the tank with a second person with bags of salt or sand on the walkboard. It holds all that weight. It's been holding all that weight as, whenever it's happened, and I've never regretted it. I can stand on it, I can kneel on it, I can remove it, I can put it back. It's awesome. And I highly, anytime somebody says, "I'm getting a new tank, I'm getting a big tank, I'm getting a steel stand," I'm like, make sure you have them make it with a walkboard, because when you are working off a stepladder or a chair, you are going to have to go up, get in the tank and work, and you're in this area, let's just say it's 2 feet wide, because that's kind of reasonable. And then you're like, "Oh, I want to reach over there a little bit." You have to get down, move your ladder over 1 foot, and get back up. And then you keep doing this and doing this. And if you're working your way through the tank killing Aiptasia, or you're removing dead skeletons, or you're arranging your rock work, or you're stepping from one ladder to another ladder, or one chair to another chair, it's such a hassle. The walkboard that's 7 feet long, amazing. And I love it. And I love that it fits on both sides of my tank. It was powder coated, and it's very old now, 15 years old. 2010, so 15 years old. There are a few spots where it's gotten rusty, and I have taken a kind of a sanding sponge and went over that area, and I just brushed some paint on top. Just some, I don't even know if it was oil base or water base. I just covered up the rusty area with some fresh paint to stop any more damage. And the stand itself is leveled completely with composite shims, so that the tank is super stable. I never see the water line change. Even when they did all the work, matter of fact, when they did all the work on the house for the foundation to fix it, they used the Reef as the 0 point, which I love, because the Reef was 100% level, and then they made everything else around the house match the Reef. That's so beautiful. Okay, I mentioned test kits. I use Elos, and then I also use API for nitrate, because my nitrates are always high. And I use Reef Labs ICP for my ICP testing. They're based out of Florida. I love them. I love their website. I sell their kits in my shop. So if you want to do the same ICP testing I do, you can. The beauty of it is their website explains what your number is, what it should be, what it was last time, and there's a wonderful share link so you can share it with other people. You're not sharing a PDF and emailing it to people. You're literally just saying copy and paste, and you can stick it into a text or a message or in a thread in a group, and people can see your parameters and discuss with you what's going on. And the fish room itself, I guess this is one of the last things I'm going to talk about. How are we doing on time? Wow, hour and a half. Okay. The fish room itself has a French drain that's the full length of the room. It's a 3 or 4 inch, probably a 3 inch pipe that I ran the full length of the room, that I cut in half and then put grates on top that I found at Home Depot that fit perfectly. And they are embedded in the concrete. And if there is a leak, if something is flooding, it goes straight into that and takes it right out of the fish room. And I don't have to go grab a mop or a shop vac. It just goes away. And that was an integral part of the remodel of the fish room back in 2010. And it works to this day, and I love it. I don't use it as for water changes because it can't handle that speed of water. So it's a lot better for me to pump it into a barrel or pump it elsewhere. You can send it to a sink, a toilet, the driveway, whatever. I mean, just wherever water needs to go. When it's coming out of a pump, it's going to come out much quicker. But when my tank leaked back in 2012 and 2013, 2012, when the tank sprung a leak, 13 months after it was set up. All that water that was coming out at 1 in the morning, when I finally took care of all the livestock and got everything resolved, the next morning when I got up, the fish room was dry because it all went to the French drain. That was awesome. And occasionally I make a mess, and the mess goes into the French drain, and I really love that. And then lastly, this is part of the equipment of the 400-gallon, and it's critical. And I talk about it all the time, but the generator system, and I have a great video about that generator on this channel. So if you have not watched it yet, and everyone on this channel should watch a generator video. I highly recommend mine. I have a very, very safe setup that explains exactly how mine is configured, how I plug it in, what plugs into it. I mean, the whole process. It was very expensive. The generator runs on 3 different fuels. I'm using gasoline, but I could use natural gas if my neighborhood had it. Or I can use propane gas, which I could take the tank off my propane grill and I could hook that up and run it. I've never done it, but I could do it. It is an option. I have a huge cable that goes from that generator. That's a 50 amp cable that goes to a 50 amp box that has a switch thing you flip over, and then my fish room sump panel comes to life, and every outlet in the fish room is alive. And that means everything that my tank is running on continues to run on it. And because I have empty outlets in the room, I can run extension cords from the fish room into this room, into my bedroom, into the kitchen, into the studio out back if I need to. And I can provide power elsewhere. I have a bin full of extension cords, but the generator is what keeps everything running. Now, the only thing it can't keep running is my temperature control, unfortunately. I can't make my house nice and cool with my generator. It's not big enough, but at least I can, maintain the tank. And that's what I've always done when I needed to. And then, like I mentioned, the battery array as well. But the generator is something that you need to test from time to time. The company that makes generators usually tells you to test it once a month. I'm really bad about that. I'm more apt to check it every 6 months. Last year, I was doing a check before we had some bad weather coming, and it actually had gas pouring out of it, which was weird. Out of somewhere out, I don't even know where it was coming from, to be honest. And I ended up, it was cheaper for me to just buy a brand new carburetor for $30 shipped off Amazon than to try and rebuild whatever was wrong. And I swapped it out. I felt like a super mechanic. We're talking about taking away like 4 little nuts, pull it off, put it on, put 4 little nuts, and you're done. Anyway, I fixed that for $30, and my generator was ready. And then when a power thing did come up, weeks later, my generator was good to go because I had already prepped for it. I made sure it was okay. Now, mine is big. It was expensive. I got it at Costco. I think it was on sale for like $800, and I said add to cart. I mean, I bought it and came home with it immediately. This is the one that replaced the one that exploded that was next to my house during the ice storm. And I've changed oil on it myself, and I've changed the air filter on it, or cleaned it as needed. I replaced it. And I use the right fuel now so it doesn't gum up or mess it up. And it has a battery, so you just push a button to start instead of pulling the cord like a lawnmower, which is really, really nice. And when you're testing it and you're running it for 20 minutes, it's recharging that battery, which is super awesome. So the next time I need to hit the button to start it, the battery just works. So, I mean, it's really nice to have a generator. And if you live in a home or a condominium or something that allows you to have a generator, that's great. If you're in a place where you're not, you're going to have to find some kind of a battery system or power inverters. You're going to have to find an alternative because your livestock that you have in your reef tank relies on you for everything, including power. So that should be part of your equipment list. When you're listing all the things on your aquarium, generator or some alternative form of power that you can get should be part of the equation. I was talking to a local club member and client of mine recently, and he had told me how he found a switch in I think he has a Prius or something like that. And when we were there, I needed his car was electric, and I needed light to cut some PVC pipe in his garage because it was just too dark. He just doesn't have a well-lit garage like I do. And so he turned on his headlights, but then the car wanted to turn them off to save the battery. It's kind of annoying. And so I asked him on the phone, did you ever figure out how to use your car as a battery for your reef tank if there's a power outage? And he says, yes, there's a setting on the dash, and I just tell it to go from here to there, and then I have the unlimited use of that battery with an extension cord that goes to my reef. I was like, that's awesome. I'm glad you figured that out. So if you have an electric car and you haven't quite figured out what steps you might need to actually provide continuous power for 6 or 8 or 12 hours, find out now while you can, while it's normal, not in the middle of a crisis. That's what I recommend. All right. I think that is everything on my list. If there was anything else I left out, I apologize. But that is my spiel for today. I did tell you about cleaning the lights. If you have any kind of LED lighting on your aquarium, please do take some time this weekend while you're relaxing, because it's a holiday weekend, and just look at your lights, whether the AI Primes or Reef-Fi or whatever own you have. If they have a spot where dust can accumulate, see if it's time to clean them out, because lights that overheat are going to more apt to fail, and you don't want that to happen. Okay, let me look at some of these comments and see if if there's anything I can answer. I mean, these people that have asked questions might be long gone at this point. I have no idea. Thomas asked me, how was college? College was great, and the Reef Retreat event was a lot of fun. There was 120 of us there. I'm telling you right now, if you are thinking you might want to go next year, and they've already set the save the date, they've already put that message out there. It's going to be early June of next year. When they announce tickets are for sale, I'm telling you right now, buy the ticket on the spot before it's sold out. Because right now, like I said, 120 people went, and they're going to make room for 30 more people. That's it. This is not Reefapalooza. This is not Aquashella. There are not going to be vendors to visit. There are not going to be corals for sale. This is an educational event. If you go to college to buy corals, you're going to the wrong college. College is designed specifically for education, and we were in a classroom, and we were taught 4 different tracts during that weekend. So there was a chemistry tract, there was a spawning tract. So a tract is like chemistry. We had 3 speakers in a row talking about water chemistry. And you would think, well, that's got to be boring, but it was not. And each one had something else they brought to the table, and there was no redundancy at all, and it was amazing. And then we had 3 speakers talking about spawning, and that was so good. And talking about not only coral spawning and spawning corals in aquariums, or capturing spawned corals in the ocean, or taking spawned corals and growing them out in labs to then plant in the ocean. All that was in there. It was really good. There was, let's see, what else was there? Do I have the other thing here? I don't see it. Let me see. Got to figure out where I put it, because I had it here open. It's in here somewhere, but I don't know where it is right this minute. But I knew. Oh, here we go. Here we go. Oh, and then we had a tract on microbiomes, and that was super interesting. And there was then dealing with pests and coral disease. That was a tract. So we had all this information to learn about these specific topics by a total of 12 speakers. And the ticket was expensive to go there. This is no $20 event. I probably spent $700 for my ticket. But my $700 ticket covered my room and boarding, my food, my drink, including alcohol, and then all the classes. And then, of course, my transportation to get to Providence, Rhode Island. That cost money, too. And then, of course, I had to pay for Jack to be boarded. And, of course, for her to be boarded, they said she has to be up to date on all her shots and everything, which was another $400. Like, oh, my God, this trip became so expensive. But in the end, I got to hang out with a lot of people, and we all got educated, and it was great. And this is what MACNA was originally. It was all about learning. You were meeting the authors, you were meeting the people writing the magazine articles, and that's kind of what this was. But at this point, this group was authors, and there were academics there. It wasn't about social media influencers. It wasn't sales pitches. It was all about getting good quality, solid information that you could learn more about it and dig into it deeper. And I highly recommend it. So like I said, the one that's happening next year, they're basically opening up 30 more spaces to make a total of 150 get in, and that's it. And during the day, you'll get up. You're sleeping in a dorm, which is fine. I don't care. I do feel like we should have a contest next year for who has the best looking dorm room, and we should decorate the crap out of our rooms. But that's just my idea, and no one approved it, okay? We would go down to, basically it was a cafeteria that was probably on top of a basketball court or something. It was a big, huge room, and the food was all provided. I don't know if the word catered is the right word, but you didn't go up and scoop things into a plate. Someone put the food in your plate, you said what you wanted, and they'd put it on your plate, and you came back to sit down. And then there was an abundance of drinks available. And it was interesting to me. Like, for example, Andrew Ryan, who was the one running the event, basically, he made one announcement at the beginning. He says, listen, guys, when you go to get your meal, there's those cabinets filled with drinks. Don't fill your backpack up with drinks like you're never going to get anything again. Just get 1 or 2 drinks to make it to lunch, and you'll be fine because there's plenty of drinks for the entire event. And he didn't have to say it twice. I mean, so often you hear announcements repeated over and over and over because no one's listening, and everyone just listened. Everyone just obeyed. It was so good. I got my 1 water bottle and my 1 Pepsi, and I went to go listen to my classes, and then I drank my stuff. And then during the day when I left, and I went to the bathroom really quick, and as I came back out, there was a barrel filled with sodas, another barrel full of water, another table covered in coffee and tea, and you could just grab whatever drink you wanted. You didn't have to sit there and spend time paying someone or running a credit card. You just grabbed your drink and walked back in, sat down, and kept listening. And I was like, this is how it should be at every conference. This is awesome. I love that. So anyway, I had a really good time, and if you're wanting to do something like that, if you want to just get immersed in knowledge, that's what Reef Retreat is about. If you're hoping to come home with a great deal on a chiller, forget it. There's no vendors there. There's no booths to explore. There was a few tables set up in the foyer outside of the classroom where you could see, in this case, Hannah was there with some of their products. And Coral Magazine had a bunch of magazines for free on the table. And Reef Aquarium Design had a stack of applications if you wanted a job to work for them. That was there. I did see Champion Lighting there with a few items, and I'm not really sure if he was selling or just answering questions. And Two Little Fishies had a table, and he was giving away stickers and pins and things. And then Jason Langer brought tons of cookies that were all fish-shaped and delicious. So there was that. It was really, really good. The Dry Reef says, I want a Swabby for the Bubble King 200 and a Vertex 180 Omega. So if you reach out to a Vast Marine and tell them what you're trying to do, they can probably help you. And they can build you or get you the parts so you build your own. That's the thing. Pretty much they sell you a kit and you make it work. But I'm so stubborn. I'm like, can you just build it for me? I'll send you the collection cup. And they did. They made my first one. And then when the motor burned up, I sent them the lid and said, put a new motor on there because I wasn't sure how they got that on there. And I've just always just paid them because it was just easier for me. Mahmood says, thanks for the advice about cutting a hole in my socks to help cut down the noise and not constantly have to deal with cleaning socks. Yeah, guys, what he's referring to is I was saying that if you decide you no longer want to use filter socks, but your sump is designed specifically for water to pour into socks, you can cut off the bottom of the sock so the water just pours down the fabric and then just pours into the system. There's nothing there to catch anything. It's just a sleeve of water running down the walls, and your sump will be nice and quiet. Daniel says, what if you used a recirculating reactor for granular ferric oxide and then trickled out the effluent to precisely control your phosphates? It is something you can do. So what you would be doing is you would set up the reactor. You would measure the phosphate of the tank, first of all, just to know you even need a reactor. And let's say it's high. Let's say it's 0.25 and you're freaking out. So you set up a reactor. You rinse out the media, the GFO, away from the aquarium. You actually run it till the water's clear. Very slow, but you just do this. You're rinsing away the fines. The fines are the little bits of metal that would get in the gills of fish or irritate corals, right? Then you would pump water into it from the aquarium into the reactor, and again, let the effluent come out into a bucket, again, because of these fines. Because when you send the salt water in, it's going to kind of like burp the media, and it's going to kind of get it tumbling a little too strong. And then when it's all back to a moonquake where it's barely rumbling in the reactor, then that liquid that's in, you'll see that the water's coming out clear. There's nothing to worry about. It's like half a gallon of water. You put the tube back inside your sump. Now, if you want to measure the effluent coming out and you say, oh, it's still coming out at 0.25, it's going too fast. So if you measure it and it's coming out at 0.1, it's slower. If it's coming out at 0, it's perfect. So the idea being that with GFO, it's not a forever media. It has to be replaced every so often. It does get used up. But the principle being that you should measure it and you want 0 coming out. And then if at some point it's coming out higher than 0, like let's say it's coming out 0.1, then you slow it down some more to get it back to coming out at 0. So you're testing and testing and testing. You're doing a lot of testing. If you don't mind doing that, yeah, you totally can do that. But, in theory, usually GFO is good for maybe 2 months or so on many aquariums. Not all. I'm just throwing an average out there. Maybe 3 months, but it is not forever. But you could dial it in. If you slow it down too much, like let's say you had to slow it down even more to get to 0, and now it's almost dripping out, what will probably happen is that the media in the reactor, the GFO, will turn to stone. It'll become a brick because there's no circulation, because the water is moving through it so slowly that it's calcifying. So that's a problem. So that's why you would just have to replace the media with new. And now you got to figure out the flow rate again. But once you've done this a little while, you kind of learn it. You just kind of know what works for your tank. And just like mine, my calcium reactor, I used to run it at 80 milliliters per minute. And then I found out that I could run it at 60 milliliters per minute, and it keeps up the alkalinity perfectly. So if once you know your number, then it's really easy to maintain that number because you know exactly what's involved. Oh, nice. Terrence is up in the air. He says, watching from 30,000 feet on our way to Atlanta. Oh, yeah, I hope all your flights got there on time. Mahmood says, are you able to build an overflow cover for a coast-to-coast overflow? Yes, I can. I just need to know the dimensions. Usually I make the overflow lid, the lid that goes on top, a little bit bigger than your overflow box. So that way, if you were floating bags of livestock, they would hit the lid like a bumper and not cover the holes in the overflow box. I know it's coast to coast, so you got a lot of teeth. You may not be worried about it. But the other benefit of the lid being a little bit bigger, being a half inch larger, is that it puts some shadow on the teeth to prevent algae from growing in those teeth. So send me an email, sales@melevsreef.com, and I'll go ahead and get your dimensions from you, and I can give you a quote. The Dry Reef asks, I'm trying to remember your name. I'm sorry. My brain is saying Chris, but I might be wrong. Yeah, Chris. He says, I want to start pulling the sand from my big display. Why? Your tank is so young. Leave it alone. But anyway, I want to take the sand from my big display. I'm going to stop the auto water changes and start pulling while doing a water change. I want to reuse the sand and make a remote deep sand bed. Are there any steps that I should follow to make sure the sand stays alive and I don't nuke anything? Well, here's the thing. Sand that's over 6 months old, I always recommend it be rinsed clean because detritus has accumulated in it. It just does. You're feeding fish, your corals are also exuding stuff, and it's going into the sand bed, and there's worms living in the sand bed, and the worms are eating whatever's in the water column, and they're pooping into the sand bed. It's even more detritus. So normally I say clean it. When you're cleaning your sand, you're losing all the beneficial stuff that's in the sand bed, and you end up with clean, moist sand that has no life in it anymore, and it's gone. If it was less than 6 months old, I'd say you could probably just scoop it out and put it in the other tank and call it a day. But the other thing is, I know your tank, and I know all that plumbing you have underneath. And I thought you were using the sand to kind of hide all that so you wouldn't see all the apparatuses down there from all the closed loop plumbing fittings and all that. So I don't know. But yeah, if you're going to remove sand from an existing tank, you usually take out 25% per week. If it's old, you wash it, and you just use a garden hose and you blast it to get all the detritus out. And then you take your nice clean rinsed sand and you put it in your aquarium, and then you start the process all over again with new seed. You could seed it with some live sand. You could save some of the original sand in a baggie, and then put that on top of the rinsed new sand in the new aquarium under the water. So you've got the clean sand in the tank, you've added water to the tank, and then you lower your Ziploc bag and you break it open and pour a little pile of live sand on top of the sand bed and let it just migrate slowly through flow. You don't spread it, you don't sprinkle it like fairy dust. You just let it be in one spot, let it migrate out quietly on its own. And when you turn on the flow in the tank, if some of it moves, some of it moves. That's just what's going to happen. But we're not trying to get it everywhere. We just want to get one concentrated spot here or there and then let it kind of dissipate into the sand bed over the next coming weeks and months. Hey, Amanda. Nice. Chris says he uses EB4s for his chillers. Yeah, those energy bars could handle a high load. They were 20 amp devices, where the smaller one, or I'm sorry, the like the EB832 is a 15 amp service. Terrence, I'm looking forward to seeing your tank. I know that you've got something in the works. Looking forward to some details. Amanda says, I wish they'd recorded the talks. I would have paid to listen to after the event. This has been heavily discussed with the people in charge, and they are all like, nope, you gotta go. So I understand. I've gotten in this discussion with a few people, and they all feel like, well, you should make it available to us. Well, that's the same thing about Magna. You had to go there to learn those things. And then BRS started sponsoring and paying for the cost of recording and editing and releasing. And then those talks went out and they got put on the web. And, this talk got 6,000 views. This one got 2,000 views. This one got 18,000 views. It happens. It's possible. But some of the speakers that we had, these academics, would never put their talk on the web. The presentation that we heard from Dr. Kevin Erickson, he said specifically, you can't even take a picture of my slides with your phone. Put your phones away. He's like, this is to this group only, conversation only. That's it. And then the very second to last slide, he had a QR code. He says, you can scan that to get to this Australian whatever it was. And then he went to the next slide. I couldn't even get my phone out fast enough to capture the QR code. It was gone. So and I asked about that. I said, why would they not want to share it? And they said academics are different than hobbyists. We're all about knowledge and dissemination of information. And they said academics, unless they're writing a paper that they're publishing, they don't even want to talk in a group setting. They want to talk to 2 or 3 people in a room. And I was like, I kind of understand where that's going. I kind of do get that. So anyway, the benefit of going and learning, and if you take away knowledge from the event that you can apply to your own refueling experience is fantastic. And you can definitely share that with other people. You can say, I learned at Reef Retreat to do this. And there's nothing wrong with that. But the presentations, they're not going to put them online. Okay. Let's see. Aquaball says, I've been running my tank for a year now. Only thing bothering me are the brown flatworms. They're not fun. Are you talking about red planaria? If you are, I have an article about that, and they're not impossible to get rid of. The most important step would be to siphon them out. And you want to siphon them out every single day for like 14 days. You just work on it. And I use airline tubing because you're losing very little water when you do that. And I took a piece of rigid airline tubing and I jammed it in the end of the flexible airline tubing. And then I put the tubing in a bucket on the floor. and I would just go into my tank and I would just slurp them up one at a time, just slurp, 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 and I would, siphon out 100, 200, 500, whatever it was, and then the next day I'd do it again. It was the same amount as the day before. You're like, how is that even possible? It's like I did nothing yesterday, and I'd slurp out another 500 or so, and then the next day it was a little bit less, and it was only 300 came out that time, and you just keep doing this day after day, and after 14 days of doing this, to where there's very few left, then you treat the tank. And when you treat the tank with flatworm exit, all the ones you couldn't see will be very visible. They will come out and they will start dying, and they will start releasing probably ammonia into the system. And it's not the medication, it's the actual flatworm dying that will affect your livestock, which is why you siphon them out as they're dying. You literally are like, you've put the chemical in, and they start dying immediately. They start writhing. They start making like flying a kite. There's a thread, and there's flatworm, 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 flatworm. And I take my tube and I slurp, 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 and I grab anything I can find, anywhere I can find them, and I suck them out of the system immediately so that they can't collectively poison the tank. And after 15 minutes, I immediately start running carbon on the tank. And you can do a big water change too. And at that point, hopefully, you don't have any flatworms left. And then the best thing you could do is do it again a week later in the third week. That way there's absolutely none left in your tank whatsoever, and you have none. That is with red planaria. If it's something else, then it's a different treatment process. All right, you're welcome. I hope it helps. You can definitely, anything that's removable, you can work on. You can even take, if you wanted to take your tank apart, you can take out rock after rock and hit them with a power head with water or a turkey baster or something, and basically rinse them off in a bucket to knock them all loose. That's another method. And then, of course, there are some predatory fish that can help eat some, but there's no guarantee, like if you bought a wrasse or you bought a blue devil damsel, that they'll eat every last one. The fish store by me back in the day when everyone had flatworms, and I mean everyone, it was the plague of Fort Worth. It was so bad, and it was, Dallas too. This one fish store says, oh, you just need the blue damsel. He's like, it'll eat them all. And he's like, I don't have any flatworms. And I was just like, man, I just don't believe you. I don't believe they will decimate every last one like they found all the candy in the reef tank. I just don't believe that. I think, yeah, they could eat quite a few. Maybe he never fed that tank, so that fish had nothing to eat, so he would eat only what he could find. I don't know. But I think that's being overly optimistic to think they can eat every last flatworm out of a tank. So that's why we do things manually, and we get helpers that work in the tank with us, like wrasses, for example, and that could help. But then finally, flatworm exit is the solution. It's sort of like aptasia control. There's a lot of different ways of tackling it, but in the end, you got to do something. And usually it involves manual application. Like in my case, I use F-aptasia. It's the one thing I swear by. Just like, phosphate control. I swear by Phosphate RX. These are just different products on the market that have worked well for me, and so I trust and I recommend them to others. The frag tank that has been reset, feels like it's almost 2 months ago. Over the last week or two, I've noticed that it's been slowly... all that's in there is one frag of zoanthids that I shoved in there just to see what would happen, and 3 chromis. I had 4, and 1 died. And no, it wasn't the chromis killing each other. It got sucked against the power head and died. I was like, oh, man. So anyway, there's 3 chromis in there, but it was growing cyanobacteria. So I put in some red cyano RX 2 days ago, possibly 3. So I'm going to see what the tank looks like today, and if it's gone, great, I'll do a water change, and that'll be the end of that. Because I want to be able to put corals in there and not have to worry about plagues. And it'd be nice when that tank is more established. It's been running a little longer. Right now it's still dealing with the ugly phase, but whatever. It's running, and there's no Mahanos, and that's all I care about. I want to show you guys something here as we wrap up the show for today. I shared this in a group yesterday. Hang on, I'm trying to find it. So I got a gift from someone, and unfortunately, I don't remember their name. They came up to me at an event. I don't remember when it was. I don't remember the name of the event. This happened a very long time ago. But they gave me this wonderful gift. And it's reef related. I am on topic. So I'm going to throw the first picture up on the screen. So this is it. So it kind of looks like a shadow box thing. And you might think, well, what is that? And that's exactly what I said. And when it was handed to me, it was given to me at the trade show. I'm working in a booth, and there's all the lights overhead. And I'm just looking at this thing, and there's this texture, and I don't know what I'm looking at. And he said, it's your reef. And I said, I don't understand. And he said, you know that picture that I asked if I could have permission to use this picture? I said, yeah. He says, I made this for you. And I was like, okay. And he says, just plug it in. And so it uses a USB cable with one of those little tiny plugs like we've all used, the little square things. So I had an outlet, and I plugged it in, but I couldn't see it because it was too bright. So I remember vividly, I climbed under the table that had the tablecloth over, so I was kind of in the dark, and I looked at it, and I was blown away. So this is what it looks like. So that was the center of my reef looking down from above. There's some zoanthids there in the 6 o'clock region. And then there's a ton of SPS corals. And it's such a neat gift. I wish I could thank a person to this day for giving this to me. This is one of those wonderful things that you would only keep if you were in a dark room. So like a bathroom with no light. That's the perfect room to have this in. So when they walk in and they're trying to find the light switch, at least you could look at something glowing on the wall and have a clue not to walk into the sink or the toilet or whatever. This also works as a night light in a room because it's very dim. But it's a really pretty thing. But when it's just that pure white I showed you, you couldn't even tell. I mean, I just had no idea what this thing was. So isn't it crazy that that thing there looks like that thing there? It's remarkable, right? And it was a really nice gift, and it hasn't failed me yet. You know, I don't know how long the LEDs inside are going to last, but I'm sure I could open up the back and figure it out. But it's kind of neat. So this was a top-down view probably of my 400-gallon, maybe in 2012 or 2013 or 2014, somewhere in there. And I've had it for a super long time. I just wanted to show it to you guys because it's something different. You know, a lot of us have reef art or, you know, we have photographs of things up on the wall or whatever. But this thing was not something I've seen before. And I wanted to share that with you guys. Let's see. Aquaball says, is there any safe way to raise the alkalinity with all for reef? I'm dosing 2.5 milliliters extra each week and testing the tank. And he says, my alkalinity now is 8.6. Everything is growing well, but it's going down every week. Before I changed water, I tested it was 8.3. After water change is 8.6. Okay, so all for reef maintains your numbers. It doesn't increase anything. So if you are deficit in any parameter, you're going to need to dose that item to bring it up. So in the case of alkalinity, I would tell you to dose baked baking soda or soda ash. And you can use the Reef chemistry calculator to determine exactly how much you need. And you would add that to your tank. And you might have to add it 2 or 3 days in a row, or maybe it's going to be forever. It could be your tank consumption is now exceeding what all for Reef can provide. That doesn't mean all for Reef is no longer good. It's still putting in the base amount your tank needs. But if your corals are absorbing more, you're going to need to put a little extra. So you're going to have to add one more thing to your routine, whether it's a manual dose each day of putting in, you know, 6 or 10 or 15 milliliters from a little cup. Like, you know, when you have cough syrup and there's a little cup on top, you just put in this amount that's supposed to be 1 tablespoon, but you turn the cup and it says half an ounce. And you turn the cup again and it says 15 ml. So you would just take your little cup and you would pour it in an area of high flow, and that would buffer up your alkalinity a little bit higher. But then it could be that once your alkalinity is at the right number, your all for Reef may keep it there. So that is something you have to determine on your own. But yeah, it could be that you're dosing all for Reef and everything's supposed to be equalized and working great. You're doing water changes and you're using all for Reef and it's fine. But you may discover your calcium just isn't staying up, or your magnesium isn't quite staying up, or your iodine's just not quite staying up. You may have to add a little extra, a little oomph to kind of fill in that void. Alkalinity is one of those ones that changes so much so frequently that I almost think you might have to actually add that as an additional thing. But I could be wrong. It could be that you just need to get up to the right number and then all for Reef will maintain it. But testing is the only way to know for sure. Yes. But you don't have to use a doser at first. Do it manually first. The reason I always recommend manually for anything is that way, if you've been doing it manually day after day after day, and you've watched the results, you've also watched nothing go wrong because you're in 100% of control of the situation, is that once you're established, and you know, like I'm using 50 milliliters because that's what I used for my 29 gallon. I had to put in 15 milliliters of Bionic Part A, or 1, whatever the number was. I had to do that every day. And then I put in 50 milliliters of Part B or 2, and that was my calcium. And Bionic had alkaline calcium, but it had 80 other trace elements in every bottle. So it was 2-part, but it was the all for Reef of the early 2000s. Now, ESV Bionic still exists to this day, and it's perfect for tanks like the one behind me. Little tiny tanks, Bionic would be perfect. All for Reef, perfect. These are all simple things we can use, and if you do them manually, and you learn 15 milliliters is too much, but 12 is just right, then when you finally buy the dosing pump and you hook it up, you calibrate the brand new dosing pump, and you tell it 12 ml, you're done. You're good to go. You're not guessing. You're not saying, let me add another minute. Let me take off 12 milliliters. Let me do this. Let me do that. You know what number your tank needs each day. And then when you're using the app to program it, and it says, how many times per day do you want to dose this? You can say once. Put in the 12 ml. Just get it done. I don't care how long that takes you. And it says, I will do that in 1 minute. You're like, okay. Or you could say, I want you to do that over 20 minutes. And you're like, all right. And whatever, it's just, you just find that sweet spot. But to put in like 1/10 of a milliliter every hour for 24 hours, I think is insane. I would put alkaline in the tank early in the morning, and I'd put calcium or magnesium later in the day, and that's how I would dose it. And I would tell it, just put in the damn dose. just put it in. Don't stagger it out over hours, because there's no upside to that makes any sense to me in any reality. Now, I realize if someone is putting in 200 milliliters of alkaline a day or something, yeah, I could see why you would not want to put that in 20 minutes. But you could definitely put that in 1 hour instead of putting it in 5-minute bursts for 16 hours in a row. You want it in the early part of the day because that is when alkaline tends to be lowest in an aquarium. Plus, it buffers up your pH, so it's a benefit for putting it in the morning anyway. PRODIBIO remodeling, hey, how's it going? He said, my alk dose tube keeps getting clogged and blowing the line off my doser and making a mess. Have you ever used a Y connector to connect your top off and alk dosing line in order to flush the line? I have not, but others have. But what you can do is wherever the tube is, where your alkaline is coming out, that tube should be above the water line and not submerged. And you should, once a week, go and grab that tubing and do this to it. And if there's anything crunchy in there, kind of squeeze the tube and break it off so it falls off so it's clear. And if your dosing pump allows you to hit a button to like force liquid out, you can just press and hold and it goes and it's squirting and you're good. You're like, fine. And just check it once a week. But I have heard that some have done something where they flush the line with some RO tube, some RO water from their top off. That is another principle. It can work. I've just never done it. But just physically checking it from time to time should be part of our routine because everything needs to be interactive with a human being from time to time. No matter how much we love automation, it's very important to make sure that everything's working the way it's supposed to and that it's coming out at the right rate, at the right time of day, for the right amount, and that your numbers are on track, which requires water testing, which is why we always end the show with this. Water tests save lives. Please do test your water parameters. Make sure that everything is where it needs to be. And don't just assume it's fine. Don't say my tank looks okay. I understand that mentality, but it's a lazy mentality. And it's really important that you double check where things are. So that way, if something goes wrong before the livestock starts looking wrong, you can catch it and correct it so the livestock never knows. But if you wait until the corals turn white or you wait till the fish are lying down on the sand bed, it's too late. Now you're having to buy new livestock. And if you're a person, and I know I give this speech every single week, but at the same time, For example, let's say your tank was fine and you never tested and it's always been fine, so why should you break that routine? It's worked perfectly. Okay, but something's going to go wrong, and then you're going to lose livestock, and then you're going to buy a new fish or two because you lost some fish. And then those new fish, because you didn't dip them properly or put them through a medicated bath or whatever, they get all the rest of your fish that survived ick, and they all die. Now you've got a whole other drama on your hands with 6 weeks of fallow, buying new fish, setting up a quarantine tank, the whole routine. Where if you just stayed on top of your water testing and didn't let anything die in the first place, you wouldn't be out shopping for new sick fish to pollute your tank. So please do test your water. Make sure everything is where it needs to be. If something's wrong, make the slight adjustments now. Keep your livestock thriving and growing. And then, next time I see you, tell me about the big tank you're buying because your tank is too small and it's full. I hope you guys have a great weekend. I don't see a live stream happening next weekend because of what I'm doing with my reef, but who knows? Maybe I'll get creative and decide to point a camera at what I'm doing. But don't count on it, okay? I'll see you guys soon. Bye.